Hey class, so we're almost there. As you can see, I didn't fill out why because this is going to be a fun lesson. So much fun. It's one of my favorite things to do ever, so we're just gonna jump right in. All right, so the last method that we learned to solve a quadratic was completing a square. So what we're gonna do today, we're only doing this one page, so that's a good thing, right? We're going to solve this following quadratic for x by completing a square. Okay, we just did that, so it should be fresh in our memories, right? But what you should notice is that there are no numbers. We're going to solve this particular quadratic equation for x when there are no numbers. So the form that this is in right now, this is standard form, and we're going to solve for x. So we're going back to those 4 steps right there to complete the square. Set it up to complete the square. Find the value of c. Factor the left side, simplify the right side, and then use the square root method to solve for x. So those are the steps that we're using today. But what you should notice is that we have an a in front of that x squared. So our leading coefficient is not 1. Okay, a could be anything. It can be 17. So what we need to do is divide everything by that a value. So I'm going to write the steps that we're doing over here and then explain it on the right side. So the first thing we're doing is we're dividing everything by a. So step 1 is divide each term, divide each side by a, both sides of the equal sign. So what that gives us on the left side, the 2 a's here cancel, so we're left with just x squared. But then the second term here, it's b times x divided by a. Well, b and a are some numbers, okay? Those are the variables taking place of some numbers. X is our variable, okay? So b and a could be anything, but x is going to remain x throughout this process. So I'm going to write this as b divided by a, like a number. So if that was 10 and that was 5, we would get 2 times x. So I'm going to leave it as b divided by a times x. Okay, so that's a number times x. Plus, I'm going to do the same thing here, c divided by a equals, well, 0 divided by a, anything divided by, or 0 divided by anything is still 0. Okay, so not too bad, right? The next step was to set it up to complete the square. Well, this c value would need to be half of b squared, and it's not. Okay, so we're going to move it to the other side and make space for the c value that is half of b squared. So we're going to set it up to complete the square. That's our step here. So we have x squared plus b over 2x plus blank, okay? And then this plus c over a, we needed to subtract that to the other side. So that gives us negative c over a, but also plus blank, okay? Because we are adding that c value to both sides. So there we just set it up to complete the square. The next step is going to be plug in your c value. And so, if you recall how to find C, C is half of B squared. Well, in this case, our B value, our coefficient, that's B, is B divided by A. So we're dividing that by 2. So what this would look like, we're taking this number and dividing it by 2. Dividing something by 2 is the same as multiplying by the reciprocal. So since we have a fraction, B divided by A, if we were to divide that whole thing by 2, okay, that looks a little messy, right? So we could say that we're multiplying it by half. Okay, so then, right, dividing by 2 is the same thing as multiplying by 1/2. So now, since it's a fraction, B times 1 is B, and A times 2 is like 2A. So what that would look like is B over 2A squared. Okay. So there's taking that number and dividing it by 2, or multiplying by 1/2. And now we need to square it. So this is back to chapter 7, using our properties of exponents. This is the power of a quotient. So both the numerator and the denominator are being raised to that power. So in our numerator, we get B squared. In the denominator, this is the power of a product. So we're taking both the 2 and squaring it and the A and squaring it. So 2 squared is 4, and then we've got A that we're also squaring. Whew, so that was a little bit. But this is our C value. We took half of B and squared it. So that is what we're plugging into both sides. B squared divided by 4A squared. B squared divided by 4A squared. Okay, so there we plugged in our C value. The next step in completing the square is to factor the left side and simplify the right. So I'm going to write that down. Factor the left side, simplify the right. Actually, we're going to do this in like 2 separate steps. So we're going to factor the left side first. And the reason that we like this is because it's a perfect square trinomial, right? We just plugged in that C value to make that a perfect square trinomial, so it factors easily. One bubble, that's squared. So the square root of the first term, the square root of x squared, is just x. First sign is a plus sign. And then your next term is the square root of the last term, or remember, it's also just half of b. And so over here we talked about what half of b was, so it's just that b divided by 2a value. So in our bubble, it's b divided by 2a. Okay, so there we factored the left side. I'm going to rewrite the right side for right now. Okay, next our step is going to be, I should probably change my colors up. Simplify the right side. So I'm just going to recopy the left side since we just factored that. So we've got x plus b over 2a squared. And we're simplifying the right side. So we have a fraction plus a fraction. When you're adding fractions together, don't you have to have a common denominator? Yes. So this denominator is a, and this denominator is 4a squared. So they both have at least one a. So our common denominator would be this 4a squared. So what do we need to multiply this denominator by to get to 4a squared? We already have 1a, so we only need to multiply by one more a and 4. So we need to take this first fraction and multiply it by 4a. But not 4a, because we don't want to change the value of the fraction, but 4a over 4a, because that's the same thing as 1. So we're multiplying this fraction by 1, so it's not changing its value, but we're just manipulating what the 1 looks like. And it's going to be a 4a over 4a. Okay, this might take me a couple steps to show it all. So the numerator then would be 4a times this. This is a negative c, so I'm just going to write that all like mushed together. 4 times a times c, they're all different, so none of them combine. So that's a negative 4ac over, and then our denominator becomes 4a times a, which is that 4a squared, which is what we wanted, plus that b squared over the 4a squared. Okay, now that we have a common denominator, we can add our two numerators together. So I'm going to drop down to the next line just to clean everything up. So our left side was x plus b over 2a, I'm just rewriting this, equals, since this one is a negative and this one is a positive, it's okay if we switch their order and keep this one positive and keep that one negative. So I'm going to put b squared minus 4ac, okay, over our 4a squared. All right, so that was a lot as well, yes. Okay, so now that we've completed the square, now step number 4 of completing the square was to solve for x by using the square root method. So we can square root both sides, simplify the radical, blah, blah, blah. So now we're going to solve for x using the square root method. So we are squaring both sides. That was kind of a lot there. All right, so we've completed the square, believe it or not, and now we're going to solve for x using the square root method. So just remember that this will be posted on at-home assignments when we're finished. Square root both sides. Okay, there's the left side, there's the right side. The square root of something that's squared, remember they cancel each other out. So on the left side, we're just left with x plus b over 2a. On the right side, had we been doing this with numbers, b, a, c, a, and a 4, those are all numbers. So this would just be the square root of a number. And what do you need to remember when you're taking the square root of a number? Plus or minus sign. So we have plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac over 4a squared. All right. So it's a little messy, right? But I kept recommending that you simplify your radical first. So let's simplify this radical. Again, back to chapter 7, taking the square root of a fraction, or no, this was just in this chapter. When we talked about radicals, you can square root the numerator and square root the denominator. Okay, so if we look at that, you can split it up, and you get if you put them both under their own radical, the square root of b squared minus 4ac over the square root of 4a squared. If you look at this, yes, b is squared, but in the next term, 4 is a perfect square, but a, we don't know what a is, and it's not squared. c, we don't know what c is, and it's not squared. So that a and the c particularly prevent us from being able to square root this whole entire expression. Also, since there's a subtraction sign there. So we're just going to leave that alone. We can't square root that because we don't have enough information. But in our denominator, we only have one term, 4 times a squared. Both 4 and a are perfect squares, so we can square root that term. So we get x plus b over 2a equals plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over. Well, the square root of 4 is 2, and the square root of a squared is a. Okay, I'm running out of room, but that's okay. And I'm not filling out my steps, but that's okay. I'll do that later too so you can see it. So our radical is simplified. Now all we need to do is get x by itself by subtracting this b over 2a from both sides. So we're subtracting b over 2a. So if you remember from all of our other examples, that number would basically just go in front of the radical. So we're subtracting b over 2a from both sides. So I'm going to come over here to the side. Negative b over 2a plus or minus square root b squared minus 4ac over 2a. That was x equals that. Thankfully, both of these already have a common denominator, so we can just plus or minus them together. So what we get is x equals negative b plus or minus square root of b squared minus 4ac, and they're all over 2a. Guess what? X is by itself. We solved for x. We're done. And it's this messy, complicated equation right here. But this is so beautiful. What we've just done is we've derived the quadratic equation. Just a quick recap here. Oh, that is beautiful. Beautiful. We took this quadratic equation, ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0, completed the square to solve for x, and we got what's called the quadratic equation. I don't know if you can appreciate this right now, but eventually you will. So this is x equals, I say the opposite of b. Yes, you can say negative b, but I tend to say the opposite of b because if b, remember, it's just a number. If it's already negative, the opposite of that would be a positive. So sometimes that's easier for our brains to click with if we say the opposite of b. So x equals the opposite of b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. And so you're going to want to know this. You're going to want to have it memorized. That process that we just did there, good news, I will never, ever, ever, ever ask you to redo this again ever. Okay? That's just for fun. So we did all that for fun. Just to say that we did. Okay. But this quadratic equation, okay, you will need to have this memorized. And thank goodness, my high school math teacher taught me in a way that I'll never forget. And whenever I teach this, I sing it. And so my brother, he's a auto diesel mechanic. He farms now too. He, what's the word? Details cars, things, mowers, tractors, whatnot. Every time I bring this up, he sings it to me because he still remembers the quadratic equation. And he doesn't even use it. So, if you know Pop Goes the Weasel, all around the mulberry bush, the monkey chased the weasel, the monkey stops to pull up his socks, Pop goes the weasel, then you can memorize this equation. So this is how it goes, right? X equals opposite b plus or minus square root b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. Let's do it all together now, class. Okay, ready? X equals opposite b plus or minus square root b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. One more time. X equals opposite b plus or minus square root b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. Okay, just one more time. X equals opposite b plus or minus square root b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. You should have that memorized. Sing it. in your sleep. Yes, because in the next lesson we're going to use it. So, to fill in the blanks, the quadratic formula right there is this thing right there. So if you want to rewrite it, you can, but I'm not going to because of space. And then we'll fill that in later. So that's today's lesson. If you want bonus points, you can schedule a Zoom meeting with me and you can sing me that formula, but only if you have it memorized. I can't really say if you're cheating or not. If it's in a Zoom meeting, you could be looking at something. But like, if you sing it to me, I'll give you a bonus point because it's just great. Okay, that's all I have today. Like I said, I will never ask you to redo this process that we just did. I just ask that you have the quadratic formula memorized, that song that I just sang you, okay? Because we're going to use it to solve quadratic functions for x in the very next lesson. So I hope you have a great day. Bye.